Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The first bullet missed him by inches. Ryland Graves dropped to the sand, his instincts kicking in before thought could form. The air was thick with smoke and betrayal. He'd been leading this mission, his mission, for the last 14 months. Covert op clean extraction. No one was supposed to know they were even here. But someone did. The sound of automatic fire echoed across the cliffside. He looked back and saw his team retreating, not regrouping. Retreating. Leaving. Dax, where the hell are you going? Ryland screamed into his comms. No response. A second explosion rocked the ground beneath him. Sand sprayed into his mouth. He scrambled behind a rusted-out patrol jeep, bleeding from his shoulder. He caught a glimpse of the evac chopper lifting off. No return sweep. No backup. Nothing. He was alone. And that's when it hit him. Not the bullet, the truth. They left him on purpose. For hours earlier, he'd kissed Laurel on the porch. She'd barely looked at him, her hand stiff on his chest. Her voice distant. Be safe. He thought it was nerves. He thought she was tired. Now he realized she knew. Pain shot through his leg as he limped toward the rocks, dragging his rifle behind him like dead weight. His vision blurred. His heart wasn't just racing, it was breaking. This wasn't just an op gone bad. This was an execution. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sea swallowed his blood, one thought drowned out everything else. Why would my own team leave me behind? Wait, I need to tell you something important. Have you ever realized that you keep watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet? This video has reached this point, which means you're enjoying it. So why not subscribe? I have a big goal for 1,000 subscribers, and you can help me reach it. Think about it. If you don't subscribe now, you might miss my next big video. This is the moment. Hit that subscribe button now. Do it now. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss out. I know you'll do it. And when we hit 4,000 subscribers, I have a special surprise for you. Now, let's continue story. Heat pressed against his skin like a second fire. Everything burned, his leg, his chest, his trust. Ryland woke up on a wooden floor with salt water in his mouth and the sound of waves pounding in the distance. His body was wrapped in rough bandages. He couldn't move at first. His ribs screamed every time he breathed. The man who saved him never spoke a word. An old fisherman, face burned by time and sun, fed him fish stew and water without asking a thing. For weeks, Ryland drifted in and out of fevered sleep, too broken to question why. In silence, he healed. In silence, he planned. One morning, he dragged himself out to the beach, leaning on a driftwood cane. His reflection in the water was unfamiliar, gaunt, scarred, eyes hollow. The man he'd been was gone. He pieced together what had happened through memory fragments. Dax's voice on the comms, quiet. The evac team lifting off early. No distress beacon triggered. They hadn't lost him. They'd left him. And they made damn sure he couldn't crawl back. He spent his days rebuilding his strength, using stones to retrain his grip, carving plans into the sand. One word repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. Why? Why Dax? Why leave him? Why was Laurel so calm that morning? By the time he left the beach shack 2 months later, he didn't walk like a soldier anymore. He moved like a storm. No headlines. No memorial. Ryland watched from a cracked hotel room in southern Mexico as the news looped through military stories, promotions, operations, retirements. His name wasn't mentioned once. As far as the world knew, Commander Ryland Graves never existed. It was by design. He clicked through military forums. Nothing. No whispers. No rumors. Not even among the old SEALs. Wiped clean. He used black market contacts to get a new identity. Bought burner phones. Paid a former NSA tech for ghost credentials. Piece by piece, he built himself back into the world like a virus sneaking through a firewall. He checked her name first. Laurel Graves. Still in Virginia. Still in government. Still married. But not to him. He stared at the screen. Laurel Mercer. His breath caught. Mercer? Dax Mercer. His hand tightened into a fist. He dug deeper. Marriage license filed 6 months after his death. Photos of them at a military gala. Dax in full dress uniform. Laurel in black. Smiling. She looked happy. And that's what hurt more than the bullets. He whispered to the empty room. How long were you planning this, Laurel? The silence didn't answer. But he wasn't waiting anymore. The ghost was coming home. The night was quiet, but Ryland's pulse wasn't. He sat in the back of a dusty, low-rent internet cafe near the Texas border. Head down, hoodie up. The hum of cheap monitors and the click of greasy keyboards surrounded him. He was staring at a live feed. Laurel was on screen, walking down a corridor inside CENTCOM in Virginia. He had hacked the internal hallway cameras using a code passed to him by a contact in Juarez. Her walk was confident, rehearsed, controlled, but there was something else in her face. Not guilt, not sorrow, power. The next video feed was worse. Dax Mercer, suit and tie, wearing Ryland's Old Navy ring on his right pinky like a trophy. Ryland froze the image. Zoomed in. That ring had his initials carved on the inside. Laurel gave it to him after his promotion. Now Dax wore it, like a souvenir. His heart slammed in his chest. They hadn't just moved on. They'd rewritten the story, replaced him, taken his life, his home, his name, and buried the truth under medals and paperwork. How many lies did you have to tell to keep smiling like that? He muttered under his breath, eyes locked on the screen. A teenage kid behind the cafe counter glanced over. You say something, man? Ryland didn't answer. His pulse was no longer a beat. It was a countdown. He didn't walk into Virginia. He slipped in. Fake passport. Clean-shaved. Dressed like a traveling contractor. Ball cap, sunglasses, southern drawl. No one looked twice. The first place he went wasn't his house. It was his grave. Section 43. Row 7. Grave 12. Ryland James Graves, Kia. There was even a folded flag bolted into the marble. Flowers sat fresh on the edge. A cheap photo frame showed him in uniform. Smiling like an idiot. He stared at his own face for a long time. A family walked by, glancing at him, probably thinking he was a friend, a fellow soldier. They had no idea the ghost was standing right there. Later that night, he parked across the street from his old home. Their home. Lights were on, curtains half drawn. Inside, he saw Laurel, dancing with a little girl, laughing. The girl was maybe 6 years old, blonde, curious eyes, looked a lot like Laurel. Then Dax entered frame, grabbed Laurel by the waist, pulled her close. They kissed. The girl ran off toward the kitchen. Ryland's stomach turned. He whispered to himself, voice low and broken, "She's not mine, right?" He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just sat there, like smoke, like shadow watching the life that was stolen from him unfold like a movie. A phantom in his own story. 2 nights later, Ryland stood at the top of the hill behind the neighborhood. Same spot he used to jog every Sunday. Back then, it felt peaceful. Now it felt fake. This was the life they built on the ruins of his. He spent the day digging through public records and digital trails. The girl's name was Mira Mercer. Age, 6 years, 2 months. Born in the United States, which meant she was conceived while he was still alive. Before the mission, before the betrayal. His breath caught in his throat. A deep, raw sound escaped him, not a sob, not a scream, just a noise from somewhere primal. They weren't just together now. They had started before. That night, he broke into the shed behind the house. It was still there, his old tool chest, his fishing pole, the heavy army duffel they used to take camping. Everything that was his, shoved to the side, forgotten. He found one photo taped to the inside wall of the shed. It was a picture of him and Laurel, smiling. Her in a white sundress, him in uniform. Sharpest scribbled on the back, "Will always be home." The ink was fading. The promise was dead. But Ryland wasn't. Ryland didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Sleep was for people with peace. And peace was a luxury he'd been robbed of. Instead, he hunted. He sat alone in a cheap motel off I-64, a wall covered in printouts and photos, strings of red thread connecting names, dates, bank statements. Laurel, DAX, private contracts, offshore transfers. Every thread he pulled revealed more rot. 3 months before his mission went south, Laurel had signed off on a classified communications asset relocation. On paper, it looked like a logistics adjustment, but the bank trail told another story, a deposit of $85,000 into a foreign account under a shell company, tied to a firm called Salon Defense Systems, a name Ryland didn't recognize. Yet, he hacked into Dax's archived messages using an old seal backdoor key, one he was never supposed to still have. Inside, he found encrypted threads between Dax and a hidden contact listed only as Bladjaw. Code words: mission movement, financial clearance. But one phrase hit like a bullet: Graves will be off radar within 48 hours. No body, no proof. Ryland leaned back, hand trembling as he stared at the screen. So it hadn't been a screw-up. It had been a greenlit takedown. And not just by Dax. This was bigger. Systemic. Signed off. Funded. This wasn't about Laurel cheating. This was about a calculated erasure. His hands tightened on the desk. They hadn't just stolen his life. They tried to delete it. He needed to know when it really started. The betrayal. The manipulation. The decay. So he went back, not physically, but digitally. Old voicemails, security logs, archived surveillance from a SEAL compound he'd led before the op. There it was. One video, time-stamped 6 weeks before the mission. Laurel had visited the base. She said it was a surprise. She brought food, smiled, kissed him. Normal. But later, when Ryland was in a strategy meeting, she had slipped away. Camera 9 caught her entering a comms room. Restricted access. She was only in there for 3 minutes. That moment had been buried. Flagged as routine. Overlooked. Now, it was the start of everything. Ryland leaned over the screen, watching it on loop. She looked over her shoulder before she entered. No hesitation. No fear. Just practiced ease. How many lies fit into 3 minutes? He dug into her call records from that day. A single outbound message, not to any number listed. Encrypted. Routed through military relays. Ghosted. But the name attached to the metadata was chilling. Project Blue Harvest. He sat still for a long time. His breath was steady, but inside, everything was on fire. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a weaponized betrayal. And she had pulled the trigger before anyone else had. Ryland had prepared himself for the worst. He had braced for the lies, the setup, the violence. He hadn't prepared for the child. He was trailing Laurel one afternoon, staying just far enough to remain unseen. She picked Mira up from school, a private academy on the edge of Arlington. Nothing flashy, but expensive enough to be intentional. Ryland sat across the street in a broken-down Chevy, engine cold. He watched the little girl climb into the back seat, her hair in 2 braids, her backpack shaped like a fox. She turned around in her seat and smiled, straight at him. It couldn't be. There's no way she knew. No way she recognized him. But that smile, it was familiar. Wide. Slightly tilted. The same way he used to smile when Laurel cracked a dry joke or told him to stop being so damn intense. He stared, frozen, his mind spinning. Could she be? He didn't follow Laurel home that day. He sat in that car for hours, trying to breathe. Trying not to hope. Trying not to believe that somewhere in the rubble of all this, something real might still exist. But the glimpse haunted him. And it changed everything. The file looked ordinary. A string of coded lines and numerical blocks buried inside a secured military folder. But Ryland had seen enough Black Ops data to recognize misdirection. This wasn't random encryption. This was a cipher. He brought it to the one person he knew could help, a former Navy drone tech named Collins, now off-grid in North Carolina. A recluse, paranoid, sharp as hell. The guy once decrypted an entire Iranian satellite code base while high on painkillers and bourbon. Look at this, Ryland said, tossing the flash drive on the table. Collins plugged it in, eyes narrowing. This is military-grade deep stuff. What are you into, Graves? Ryland didn't answer. He didn't have to. 20 minutes later, Collins leaned back. Your wife was involved in something called Blue Harvest. It's not a mission name. It's a program. What kind of program? Rylan asked. Covert assassinations, blackmail, surveillance on U.S. soil, and a little cherry on top. They erased your record to cover it all up. Rylan's face didn't flinch, but inside, his chest burned. So they didn't just betray me, he said. They used me. No, Collins said. They made you disappear, so they could sell your silence. Rylan picked up the drive. The game had just changed. He wasn't just exposing a lie. He was about to destroy an entire machine. They came for him at 3:14 a.m. 3 men. No badges. No words. Just silencers, clean movements, black gear. But Rylan was ready. The first one breached the door and caught a knee to the face. The second took a glass bottle to the throat before he could pull the trigger. The third ran. Rylan chased him into the alley, tackled him hard. The man hit the ground, gasping, reaching for a blade. Rylan grabbed it and pressed it against his neck. Who sent you? The man wheezed, eyes wide. It wasn't personal. You were supposed to stay dead. Rylan twisted his wrist until the man screamed. Names. Salon Defense. Same as the contract. Same as the op. Rylan's hand froze. That name again. He stood up, wiping the blood from his face. Tell them I'm still not dead. And this time, I'll send bodies instead of messages. The man limped away. Rylan didn't follow. The wolves had found him. Good. Now they knew what it felt like to be hunted. Back in Virginia, Laurel felt something she hadn't in years. Fear. She watched the news, fingers trembling as she scrolled through an article. Anonymous hack exposes private military files, alleged link to ex-SEAL Commander Graves. She clicked off the screen. He was back. She knew it in her bones. Meanwhile, Rylan stood in a rented apartment above a laundromat in Richmond, staring at surveillance photos of Laurel, Dax, and a man in a suit someone knew. He circled the face. A handler? A boss. He added a red pin to the board. The loop was closing. He looked into the camera he'd rigged into the corner of the room. This wasn't just for intel. It was a message. He pressed record. Wherever you're watching this from. Atlanta, Houston, Sacramento, or maybe some little town nobody talks about. I want you to remember something. They buried me. They erased me. And they built a life on my bones. Pause. But bones don't stay buried forever. Beat. Hey. You watching from a couch, a bunk, a subway, or somewhere cold and quiet? Drop your city below. Tell me where the truth's finally being heard. 'Cause I'm not just coming for revenge. I'm coming for every name behind that curtain. The air smelled like oil, sweat, and rusted steel. Rylan stood in the back of an old machine shop, deep in the Appalachian backroads, face to face with the last person he trusted. Cal Avery, ex-SEAL, weapons master, off-grid since 2016. Cal stared at Rylan like he was seeing a ghost. Damn, you really are breathing. Barely, Rylan said. I need tools. And silence. Cal didn't ask questions. Just pulled off his gloves and led him to the back. The forge was real. Hammers, metal, wires, scrap tech, and gun parts everywhere. It wasn't just a shop. It was a bunker disguised as a junkyard. I don't do missions anymore, Cal said, tossing him a duffel. I build things. I keep quiet. I'm not here for war, Rylan muttered, checking the modified gear. I'm here for clarity. Cal raised an eyebrow. Clarity doesn't usually come with C4 and silencers. Rylan zipped the bag shut. No, but it makes sure they listen when you speak. As night fell, they sat by the forge's heat. Rylan leaned forward. They used me, Cal. She used me. Cal didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, You gonna kill her? Rylan looked down. I'm going to find out if the woman I loved ever existed in the first place. Laurel sat at her kitchen table, lights off, wine untouched. The world saw her as composed, a military intelligence analyst with grace, rank, and a quiet edge. But she was cracking. She opened the old photo album, the one she kept buried beneath the laundry room shelf. Page after page, Rylan in uniform, them hiking, laughing, wrapped up in firelight. It wasn't fake. None of it was fake. Until it was. Dax entered, loosening his tie, expression hard. Another message dropped. Video this time. He's taunting us. Laurel didn't look up. He's not taunting, she whispered. He's circling. Dax stepped closer. You think he knows? He always knew, she said quietly. He just didn't want to believe it. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message. Camera 9. 3 minutes. 6 weeks before Yemen. Her heart stopped. Only one person would know what that meant. She stood slowly, walked into the bathroom, and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman in the reflection wasn't the one from the album. This version was broken into fragments: truth, regret, ambition, and guilt. A prism. Each side reflected something different. It was 2 a.m. when it arrived. A burner phone slipped into Laurel's mailbox. No return address. Just a flash drive taped to the back. She locked the door, sat down, and pressed play. The screen flickered. Footage. Rylan in uniform. Rylan bleeding in sand. Dax walking away from his body. Laurel, giving the pre-op clearance. Her entire world froze. Then Rylan's voice. You made the call. You signed the file. And you slept beside the man who put a bullet in my name. You never thought I'd survive. But I did. Now you get to survive too. Every damn day knowing I'm out there. Waiting. Watching. Unforgiving. Laurel dropped the phone. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. She wasn't scared of him. She was scared of how much of her wanted him to come. Not to hurt her. Not to expose her. But to see her. To ask if it was ever real. Because even she wasn't sure anymore. The signal wasn't clean, but it was enough. Naira sat at a cluttered desk in a motel room lit by cheap neon and caffeine haze. She was the kind of person who didn't need loyalty. She needed logic. But after 2 weeks working with Rylan, logic was beginning to lose its grip. You're not just trying to burn them, she said without looking up. You're trying to bury them alive. Rylan stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes locked on the laptop. I want truth first. Fire after. She cracked a classified audio file pulled from CENTCOM's archived transmissions. Static filled the air. Then voices. Blue Harvest protocols approved. Operational sweep must leave no trace. Graves is confirmed expendable. Naira turned to him slowly. They called you expendable. Rylan didn't blink. That's the clean version. She stared at him, this man she'd known as a myth. What kind of soldier survives betrayal, blood loss, and erasure, only to come back with silence in his soul? You don't talk much, she said. I talk when the silence gets loud. He picked up the flash drive and walked out. He had everything he needed. The truth wasn't buried anymore. Now it was loaded. He broke into Dax's office at 2:47 a.m. Simple layout. High-rise building. Security cameras disabled. Just him and a red crowbar. The room smelled like leather and power. He opened a locked cabinet. Inside, a hidden hard drive, military coins, 3 burner phones, and a framed photo. It was of the 3 of them, Rylan, Dax, and Laurel. Back before the storm. His smile looked real. So did theirs. But someone had burned the corner of the photo. The fire reached only one face, his. He stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Not confused. Just hollow. The hard drive was encrypted, but Naira could crack it. What caught his eye was something smaller. A paper file clipped to the back. OP, Blue Harvest, final approvals, Laurel's signature. Dax's. And one other name, redacted. He whispered, there's always someone else. Then he opened one of the burner phones. It had only one outgoing message. He'll never be found. Sent the night after the ambush. Rylan looked around the office, perfectly organized. Clean. Cold. He pulled out a marker and scrawled across Dax's family photo. I'm found. Yemen. Flashback. The moment the world ended. Sand blasted his face. Gunfire tore through the air. Rylan barked orders into his mic, fall back to Zone 3, regroup at evac. Dax's voice crackled. We're rerouted. Package compromised. Abort fallback. What? Who ordered that? Silence. Then the blast. He was thrown through the air, ribs snapping, head spinning. He opened his eyes to smoke. Heat. Pain. He saw Boots walking toward him. It was Dax. Rylan raised a hand. Dax, help. But Dax just stared. No rage. No regret. Just calculation. He turned away, walked to the chopper, lifted off. Blood pooled beneath Rylan as the blades disappeared into the sky. His voice cracked, whispering, "You left me." Back in the present, Rylan stood at the edge of a bridge, watching the cars below. The wind hit his face. His phone buzzed. Naira's voice came through. "We cracked the drive. You're not just a victim, Rylan. You're the last threat left standing." He watched her from the alley. Laurel stood in line at the bakery, laughing politely with the barista, tapping her card, sliding her phone into the coat pocket she used to hang beside his at home. She looked so normal. Rylan stood in the shadows, face hidden under a hood, shoulders stiff. It had been over a decade since he first kissed her. Over 2 years since she left him for dead. And yet here he was, still watching. Still wondering if she ever looked over her shoulder and saw the ghost behind her. He wasn't sure what he hated more, her betrayal or the part of him that still wanted to hear her voice say his name again. But that was weakness. And weakness didn't belong here anymore. Later, across town, he watched Mira again, getting picked up from school. She jumped into Dax's SUV, smiled, threw her arms around him like he was her whole world. Rylan watched, jaw clenched. Was she his? Or had she just grown up inside the lie that replaced him? The question haunted him, but he shoved it down. He had no time for doubts. Only moves. "She's more than just an analyst," Naira said, scrolling through decrypted Blue Harvest files on a burner laptop. "Who?" Rylan asked, his tone sharp. "Laurel. She wasn't just the paper pusher. She coordinated the intel feeds that made the op look legit. She buried the flags." Rylan leaned over the table. "She signed the op. But she also signed off on surveillance kills." Naira looked up, eyes narrowing. "This woman didn't just cheat on you, Graves. She sold people." Rylan stared at the screen. Laurel's photo ID stared back. Cold, clean, official. His hand hovered over the mouse before clicking into a secure folder. Inside, video files. He clicked one. A recorded debrief. Laurel speaking. Calm. Sharp. Focused. "Target has become unstable. Recommendation, remove. Graves will never ask questions." That line hit like a fuse. His lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd counted on him, loving her too much to suspect it. Naira didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The spark was lit. Laurel sat alone in the dark, the glow of the laptop lighting half her face. She replayed the old footage of Rylan's commendation speech. Back when his eyes still held light. Back when he believed in things like loyalty. Back when he still believed in her. Then her phone rang. Dax. She let it go to voicemail. He left a message. "I know he's back. You knew first. I saw your face. If he comes for us, you better pray he's still the man you remember." She closed her eyes. She didn't believe in prayer anymore. Back across the city, Rylan held a wiretap headset to his ear, heart racing. He'd been scanning Dax's calls for 3 days, and this was the first one that mattered. That message confirmed it. They were scared. And the moment fear enters the room, everything changes. He whispered under his breath, "Now." I start pressing pressure points. He remembered the way she looked at him the day they got married. Not with fairy tale sparkle. Not with shy smiles. She looked at him like he was her anchor, the only thing that kept her steady in a chaotic world. And he believed her. The wedding had been simple. Backyard. Close friends. Uniform instead of a tux. She wore off-white, not because she had to, but because she didn't care about playing tradition. She said vows in her own words. Short. Sharp. True. You fight for the country. I'll fight for you. He used to replay that line in his head during combat missions. It kept him calm. It kept him human. Now, it just echoed like a bad joke. Back in the present, Rylan sat in a hotel room in Baltimore, staring at a copy of their wedding video he'd recovered from an old external hard drive. Her voice sounded younger, softer, and when she said his name, it cracked something in him. He couldn't tell if it was love or poison. He paused the video on her face, smiling, glowing, then whispered, Were any of your vows real, Laurel? Or were you already counting the days until I became useful to someone else? The file corrupted halfway through. And maybe that was perfect, because nothing about them was whole anymore. You're off your line, Naira said, leaning in the doorway, sipping burnt motel coffee. Rylan was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands laced, staring at nothing. You haven't moved in 2 hours. I'm thinking. No, she said, stepping closer. You're drifting. He didn't answer. Because she was right. He was stuck somewhere between rage and ache. Between wanting to expose the entire operation and wanting to stand in front of Laurel just once and ask why. You know what your problem is? Naira added. You keep waiting for the pain to make sense. It won't. Some people just break you and walk away. Rylan finally looked up. You ever been broken? She scoffed. Only by people who smiled while doing it. They shared a moment of quiet. The kind where two wounded souls recognize each other. Then his phone lit up. New data file. The results of Myra's birth certificate trace. He opened it slowly. Father. Unknown. He stared at the screen. Not Dax. Not him. Just blank. That girl doesn't even know who her blood is, he said softly. Naira tilted her head. Does it matter? Rylan stood. Only if I let it. He closed the laptop. There was no more room for drifting. Only damage control. And maybe destruction. Laurel sat in the dark with her feet curled up on the couch, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Dax had gone to bed 2 hours ago, leaving behind the usual trail, scotch in the glass, tie on the chair, nothing said. They were still married, technically, but the connection between them had thinned out like cheap thread. And lately, all she could hear was his voice. Not Dax's. Rylan's. The old voice message had come out of nowhere. A compressed audio file emailed to a dead account. No subject line. Just one file. She played it on loop now, over and over. It was Rylan laughing. Unscripted. Unedited. Just him, telling a dumb story about a busted radio on base, swearing at static like it had feelings. He ended the message by saying, I'll be home soon. Don't wait up, though. I'm gonna bring breakfast. She hadn't heard that voice in years. Now she sat frozen, the echo of it crashing into her chest like waves that never stopped. She should have deleted it, but she couldn't, because part of her still missed that version of him, the version that didn't know what she'd done. Upstairs, Dax stirred. Laurel stayed right where she was, one hand covering her mouth. She didn't cry, but she didn't move either. The echo of Rylan was louder than ever, and she knew he was coming. It was a cold, wet night in Norfolk. Rylan waited in the shadows behind an old veterans clinic, watching the building across the street. Watching him, Carter Sloan, former SEAL, one of the men on the original Yemen op, one of the last faces Rylan saw before the explosion. Rylan had tracked him for weeks. Carter lived quietly now, off book, no ties to the military, just a dog, a part-time job at a marina, and one hell of a secret. Tonight, it was time to push the threshold. Rylan stepped into the alley just as Carter lit a cigarette. Carter froze when he saw him. Jesus, you're supposed to be dead. Rylan kept walking. Slow. Steady. Yeah. A lot of things are supposed to be. Carter took a step back, hand instinctively brushing his waist. No weapon. I didn't sign off on it, man. I didn't have a choice. You had a radio. You had a voice, Rylan said flatly. You had me on the ground, bleeding out, and you said nothing. I was ordered to stand down. Rylan stopped a foot away. By who? Carter looked away. Say the name. I can't. You will. Carter hesitated, then whispered it. A name Rylan hadn't heard before. Victor Maddox. Something shifted inside Rylan. A door opened. The betrayal hadn't ended with Laurel. There was someone higher. Someone pulling all the strings. The threshold wasn't just crossed. It was blown wide open. Laurel didn't sleep that night. Not after hearing Maddox's name whispered through the walls of her mind. She hadn't heard it in years, but it was tied to everything. To the operation. To the secrecy. To the cost. She walked into the bathroom, stared at herself in the mirror again. Same reflection. Same face. But the woman looking back felt miles away from who she used to be. She opened her laptop and dug through encrypted archives, old communications, off-book transfers, clearance authorizations. There it was, a file labeled Yemen 213, Graves deletion approved, her name on the digital signature. Dax's too. And Victor Maddox above them all, buried in the metadata. She called Dax. He answered on the second ring, voice low. This can wait until morning. No, it can't, she said. He knows. A beat of silence. Knows what? About Maddox. About the op. About everything. Dax sighed. We were protecting the project. You knew what we signed up for. I signed up to serve, she snapped. Not erase the man I loved. Another pause. Then Dax said, cold as steel, you stopped loving him when you chose the mission. That was the moment. The line between them? It wasn't cracked anymore. It was broken. And she felt it. The divide, growing deeper with every breath. It happened just before dawn. A warehouse in Alexandria, shell company for Salon Defense, exploded in a fireball that lit up the sky. Fire crews arrived too late. Inside, they found nothing but rubble and a single spray-painted message on the outer wall. How many graves do you need? The news broke within an hour. Anonymous attack. No confirmed victims. No suspects. But the people who needed to see it? They saw it. Ryland stood on a rooftop nearby, watching the fire burn, hands tucked into his jacket. No smile. No satisfaction. Just heat. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was a signal flare. His burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message. You've made your move. Now we make ours. VM. Ryland stared at the letters. Victor Maddox. The man behind the curtain had finally spoken. Naira stepped up beside him, watching the flames. That'll piss off some powerful people. Good, Ryland muttered. That means they're paying attention. She looked at him sideways. You ever wonder if you're gonna make it out of this alive? Ryland didn't look away from the fire. I'm not here to survive, he said. I'm here to end it. The media called him the Ghost. Unconfirmed reports of a rogue Navy SEAL, presumed Kia, resurfacing to expose classified ops and military cover-ups. Cable anchors speculated. Podcasts debated. Reddit exploded. But none of them had proof. Just flashes of surveillance footage, distorted audio leaks, and a photo blurry, but unmistakable, of Ryland walking out of a warehouse minutes before the explosion. Laurel watched the news feed from her office at CENTCOM. She kept the volume low, but the room still felt loud. Her colleagues whispered behind glass doors. Her supervisor paused when passing her desk. They didn't say it, but she could feel it. They knew. Not the details, not yet. But the smell of fire was already in the air. She stepped into the restroom, locked the stall, and pulled out her phone. There was one new message. No name. Just a video. She tapped play. Ryland's face appeared, raw, silent, burning with purpose. He didn't speak. He just held up a photo of her. One from years ago. Smiling. Pure. Back when things still felt right. Then he looked into the camera. The glare in his eyes said everything. Do you even recognize yourself anymore? Laurel sat in silence, phone trembling in her hand. She didn't have an answer. Because deep down, she didn't. Dax slammed the office door behind him, glass trembling in its frame. What the hell did you give him? He barked. Laurel didn't flinch. I didn't give him anything. He's broadcasting our past like a Netflix docuseries. You think Maddox is going to protect us now? Laurel folded her arms. He's not the only one with leverage. Dax stepped forward. What does that mean? It means I've kept receipts. From the day you first touched a pen to lie for Maddox. The room hissed with static tension, the unspoken truth finally bleeding out. You don't get to play the moral card now, Dax snapped. You made just as many calls as I did. But I didn't enjoy it, she fired back. You did. Silence. The kind that comes when the last bridge catches flame. You think he's coming for you? Dax asked, voice low now. He's not. He's coming for all of us. I know, Laurel said, voice shaking for the first time. And I hope he doesn't stop. Naira stared at the laptop screen like it was radioactive. I've seen blackmail files, she said. But this? This is a vault full of sins. Ryland leaned over her shoulder. A folder titled Failsafes v. Maddox sat open, exposing videos, voice memos, and transaction logs. One file showed Dax in a closed-door meeting. Documents on the table, Laurel's signature visible in the reflection of the glass. Another file? A list of foreign payments, bribes, contracts, missions that were never authorized, but always carried out. Maddox isn't just a shadow, Naira said. He's a storm. The kind that rewrites history. Ryland didn't blink. And history's about to correct itself. She turned to him. You know, once you go public with this, there's no hiding. This isn't just revenge. This is a war. I know. What's your play? Ryland stood, jaw tight. I leaked just enough to scare Maddox. Then I cut off every exit. He copied the top 4 files to a clean drive. Laurel, Dax, Maddox. They weren't just guilty. They were recorded. And now, they were owned. The trap was simple. Old habits never die, and Dax still took the same route to his private gym every Thursday. Same time. Same routine. Never changed. That's what made it easy. Ryland was already waiting in the parking garage. Dax stepped out of his car, AirPods in, distracted. Ryland moved behind him, silent, controlled. Not a sound. Until he pressed the cold edge of a knife against Dax's side. Don't talk. Don't look. Just walk. Dax froze, pulse pounding in his neck. They walked into the stairwell, 2 flights down, into a dark maintenance room Ryland had cleared hours earlier. Then Dax turned. Tried to swing. Ryland blocked it. Fast. Pressed him to the wall. I could kill you right now, Ryland said, voice steady. But I want you alive long enough to feel what I felt. Dax spat blood, coughing. You don't scare me. No. Ryland pulled a flash drive from his pocket. What about this? Laurel's voice. Your face. Your orders. Sent to 5 news outlets on a time delay. Dax froze. What do you want? I want your silence. I'm not the boss here. Ryland leaned in. No. But you're the warning shot. He left Dax bleeding but breathing. Because this wasn't the final hit. This was just the echo before the bullet. The motel room was dark, lit only by the flicker of a muted TV and the soft click of Naira's keyboard. Ryland sat at the edge of the bed, hunched over, elbows on his knees. He hadn't spoken in 15 minutes. Naira noticed. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just closed the laptop and turned the TV off. Say it, she said. He shook his head. Say it anyway. Ryland's voice was low, like it hurt to push the words out. I don't know who I'm becoming. Naira stayed quiet. I used to believe in codes, he continued. In loyalty, honor, people. Now I'm just breaking things. You're not breaking things, she said. You're exposing them. He looked up. And when there's nothing left to expose, what am I then? She stepped closer, sat beside him, not touching, just breathing the same air. You think you're the only one carrying ghosts, she whispered. I've done things for intel I can't even say out loud. Lied to people who trusted me. Betrayed people who didn't deserve it. You ever love one of them? Ryland asked. Her pause said enough. Silence filled the room again, the kind that says more than words. Then Naira said, You want me to be her, don't you? Some part of you. Ryland didn't answer. She stood. I'm not her. And you're not who you were. So stop waiting for either of us to go back. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not as an ally. Not as a tool. But as someone who stayed when she didn't have to. And that's where it got messy. That's where it got real. Because revenge was simple. But connection? That was a whole different kind of war. The first file went live at 4:06 a.m. By 4:12, it was trending on Twitter. By 4:30, 4 independent news sites had picked it up. At 5 o'clock, it hit cable news. No watermark. No logos. Just the facts. Raw. Ugly. Unavoidable. A video compilation played across screens around the country. Laurel's voice on an encrypted call. Graves will follow orders until we pull the trigger. Dax in a debrief. The mission's cleaner without him. Signed clearance files from CENTCOM, Blue Harvest. Deletion authorized. A photo of Ryland's grave, pristine. Then, Ryland's face, alive, staring into a camera. One line burned through the silence. I was never the threat. I was the proof. News anchors scrambled. Commentators shouted. Military spokespeople stalled. And behind it all, the American public watched in disbelief. Ryland sat in a stolen SUV on the side of a Virginia highway, parked under a dead billboard. His phone buzzed nonstop. Messages. Alerts. Chaos. He ignored all of it. Beside him, Naira scrolled through the social feed. You just lit the country on fire. He didn't speak. She kept scrolling. Look at this. Someone turned your message into a protest chant. Ryland finally looked up. What's it say? She turned the screen. I am the proof. He let out a slow breath. Not relief. Not pride. Just release. Because for the first time since that day in the sand, the silence was broken. Laurel knew before she opened her inbox. The weight in her chest. The silence in the building. The way her assistant couldn't look her in the eye. Everything had changed. Inside her office, her security badge no longer worked. A federal escort was already waiting. We need you to come with us, he said flatly. She didn't ask where. She already knew. Down the hall, the walls felt like they were closing in. People who used to shake her hand now looked through her. Every step echoed. She was no longer the insider. She was evidence. In a side conference room, they sat her across from two suits. Not military. Not local. Something higher. Homeland, maybe. Or worse. One dropped a printed transcript onto the table. Her voice. Dax's voice. Ryland's name. All laid out in ink and timestamps. This is your signature, correct? The agent asked. Laurel stared at the paper. Did she lie? Fight? Break? No. She nodded. Across town, Dax was pulled from a gym locker room in handcuffs, shirt half-buttoned, reporters already at the gates. He looked stunned. Not because he didn't see it coming. Because he didn't believe it would ever happen. And Ryland? He watched from a distance, sitting in the back of a rundown diner, TV flickering above the register. Footage of Dax's arrest played in silence. Laurel's face followed, walking into the building, head down, hands visible, not cuffed. The screen cut to black. Naira slid him a fresh cup of coffee. That look on your face, what is it? He stared forward. Closure. A beat. Then he added, almost. She waited for him. Not behind a wall. Not in a secure building. Not with guards or agents around. Just a quiet parking garage in the heart of D.C., 3 levels down, no cameras, no exits that didn't echo. Ryland walked in without a sound. She turned before he said a word. He looked different now. Less military. More storm. Hair longer. Face older. A scar at his jaw that hadn't been there the last time she kissed him. But his eyes? Same. Too familiar. Too painful. I didn't run, she said first. I know, he replied. You could have killed me a dozen times. I still could. Silence. Then Laurel said, You want the truth? All of it. Ryland nodded once. She took a breath, the kind that drags guilt up from the ribs. They told me you were unstable, that if we didn't cut you out, you'd expose something that would get people killed. I didn't believe it at first. But Maddox, Dax, they made it make sense. Did you ever think to ask me? He said quietly. I was scared. You should have been loyal. Another pause. Laurel stepped forward, just enough that the air between them turned electric. I never stopped loving you. Ryland's jaw flexed. But I stopped trusting you, she added. Because you always chose the mission. And I didn't want to be another one. He laughed. One hollow breath. You think this, he motioned to everything between them, wasn't my mission? She blinked hard, but no tears came. You're here to kill me? No, he said. Killing you would be easy. Living with what you did? That's the sentence. He turned to leave. She didn't follow, but her voice followed him. I'm sorry. Ryland didn't stop walking, didn't turn around, but 3 words slipped out under his breath. So am I. The file sat open on the laptop. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. 5 minutes to push every last document, video, voice log, and authorization form into the public domain. The full unredacted package. Names, faces, operations, codes, Secrets. Blue Harvest would burn. The people who funded it, the ones who signed off and vanished behind titles and rank, would have nowhere to run. Maddox, Dax, Laurel, even names Ryland didn't know would go down. He stood at the edge of an old observation deck overlooking the Potomac, laptop on the concrete ledge in front of him. The city glittered in the distance like it had no idea what was coming. But it did. The leaks had already shaken the ground. This would drop it into the ocean. His finger hovered over the key. All it took was pressure, and he had so much of it built inside. Naira's voice came through the earpiece. You there? Yeah. You about to press it? Maybe. Then listen to me before you do. Ryland stayed quiet. The wind pushed against his coat. You drop all of it, she said. And you don't just take down monsters. You take down the people they stood next to. People who didn't know. People who tried to stop it. Collateral damage is still damage. This isn't a moral debate. I'm not debating, she said. I'm reminding you why you didn't put a bullet in Laurel's head last night. That landed. Hard. He looked back at the screen, at the list of files glowing in the dark. The last one was labeled Ryland_final clearance.mp4. He didn't even remember recording it. But there it was, a version of him from years ago. Younger, believing, full of purpose. It made him sick. He closed the laptop slowly. Not today, he said into the calm. Naira exhaled. You sure? No, he answered. But I'm not doing it out of rage. I'm done letting them control how I swing the hammer. He slipped the drive back into his coat. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a weapon can do is stay loaded. And wait. The message came at 2:03 a.m. No name. No warning. Just a video file. Ryland opened it in silence. The footage was grainy, but he recognized the room instantly, an old storage unit outside Quantico, once used as a back-channel holding space for military detainees. Inside the room sat Laurel, tied to a chair, blood on her temple, duct tape across her mouth, eyes wide. Behind her, a voice off-screen spoke clearly. You want her alive, Graves? Stop digging. No more leaks. No more games. Or she's gone. You have 24 hours. We're done waiting. The video cut off. Just like that. Ryland didn't move. Didn't speak. His chest rose once, then fell. Controlled. Precise. But his mind? Spinning. Naira stood across from him, pale. What is this? They've got her. Naira swallowed. We didn't think they'd hit her directly. She's the loose end, Ryland said coldly. She knew too much, and I didn't kill her. Now they're fixing that mistake for me. He walked to the weapons bag, unzipped it, checked the loadout. Quiet hands. Focused steps. Naira stood still. What's the move? Ryland looked up. Calm. Too calm. We don't negotiate with people who erase lives for a living. And if it's a trap? He strapped the pistol to his belt. Then I walk into it. He pulled on his jacket. Reached for the flash drive, the last one. The one with everything. If he didn't walk out, Naira would know what to do. She stepped in front of him. This isn't about saving her, is it? He paused. No, then what? He stared past her, voice low. It's about making them regret ever touching what was mine. The storm hit just before dawn. Rain came in sideways, slamming against the windows of a compound hidden 3 miles outside a decommissioned naval base in Maryland. On paper, it was listed as a storage site for outdated surveillance gear. In reality, it was Blue Harvest's last physical nerve center. And tonight, it was about to bleed. Ryland moved through the tree line like he was born from it. Gear tight. Weapon dry. Heart silent. Inside the compound, 6 operators rotated in shifts. Armed. Trained. Loyal to the paycheck, not the flag. Naira's voice crackled in his ear. Thermal scan confirms 8 heat signatures. 1 stationary. Might be her. Keep the line open. Copy that. And Ryland. He paused, eyes locked on the security gate ahead. Don't die in there. He didn't respond. The first guard went down without a sound. One hand over his mouth, the other twisting his wrist until the bones snapped clean. The second never even turned around. Ryland moved like he had one purpose. Because he did. Inside the facility, Red lights pulsed in the hallway. Emergency systems flickering from Naira's remote access hack. He planted charges along the west wall, kept moving. Precision wasn't about speed, it was about control. And he had that in every breath. Then he found her. Laurel, tied to a chair. Same room as the video. Cuts on her face. Breathing, but barely. He approached slowly. She looked up. Their eyes met. Something cracked inside her. Maybe relief. Maybe guilt. Maybe both. You came, she whispered, lips split. You didn't think I would? She tried to smile. Failed. They said you'd let me die. Rylan started cutting the zip ties. Then they don't know me at all. Alarms blared. Movement outside. Naira's voice came in fast. Inbound team. East wing. For minimum. Light the wall, Rylan said. A pause. Then boom. The west wall exploded outward in fire and smoke, shaking the whole compound. Chaos erupted. Screams. Running. Disoriented security. Perfect. Rylan slung Laurel's arm over his shoulder. She winced. Can you walk? I can try. Don't try. Move. They cut through the smoke and fire, bullets flying behind them, heat licking their backs. By the time they reached the extraction point, Naira had already killed the power grid. Helicopters were on their way. So were the feds. So was everyone. But Rylan didn't care. He'd just dragged the devil's secret project into the light. And now? Now it was going to burn. They didn't speak for the first hour. Laurel sat in the corner of a safe house borrowed through one of Naira's burner contacts. Her face was bruised, her shoulder wrapped, one eye still swollen from the backhand she'd taken before the rescue. Rylan stood near the window, watching headlights pass on the distant highway. The adrenaline was gone now, and in its place sat the weight. Laurel finally broke the silence. You didn't have to come for me. Rylan didn't turn around. I know. Then why did you? He took a breath, slow and sharp. Because I'm not them. She nodded, like she expected that. But her voice cracked when she spoke again. They were going to kill me, Rylan. Just erase me. Like you. He finally turned. And what did you think they were going to do when you signed the same orders for me? She looked away. That silence between them, it wasn't just awkward. It was heavy. The kind that carries years inside it. I didn't think it would go that far, she whispered. He stepped forward. You didn't think I'd die? Or you didn't think you'd care if I did? Her breath caught. She looked at him, full of wreckage. I cared. You cared after the wires were cut. After I was bleeding out on foreign soil while you were putting your daughter to bed with a man wearing my ring. That one hit her. Hard. I never wanted this, she said. Then why did you choose it? She blinked. Because I didn't know who I was without them. Without that job. That power. That control. And now? He asked. She met his eyes. Now I don't even know if I deserve to be alive. Rylan stood still for a long time, then sat down across from her. I didn't come here to save you. She nodded. I know. I came to see if there was anything left of the woman I married. And he looked at her for a long time, then said, I don't know yet. The headline hit like a missile. Top defense official Victor Maddox implicated in black OPS cover-up. Investigation launched. Rylan stared at the TV in the corner of the safe house living room as the anchor's voice cut through static. Sources confirmed that over 120 classified documents have been leaked directly to federal investigators, linking former Deputy Director Maddox to an off-the-books program called Blue Harvest, which allegedly involved illegal surveillance, assassinations, and the forced disappearance of U.S. Navy Commander Rylan Graves, presumed dead 2 years ago. Laurel sat across from him, pale. Her name hadn't hit the news yet, but it would. Because this wasn't just a collapse of a man. It was the unraveling of a system. In the background, Naira was still at the laptop, cross-checking files, sending dead drops, wiping traces. DC's going to be on fire by morning, she muttered. Half the people who signed off on this are already lawyering up. The other half are pretending they never met each other. Anyone reach out to you? Rylan asked. Yeah, 3 journalists. 1 government mole. And my ex, she added dryly. So, hell's frozen over. The footage of Maddox being approached by 2 federal agents played next. No cuffs yet. But his face? Cracked. He was cornered. For the first time in decades. Ryland stood up. Laurel looked at him. Where are you going? He grabbed his jacket. Collapse isn't enough. They'll rebuild. Shift names. Repackage evil in something cleaner. And what are you going to do? He turned, face calm. Focused. I'm going to make sure the next time someone tries this, they remember what happened the first time. He didn't sleep the night the news broke. The safe house was quiet. The hum of Naira's laptop had gone still. Laurel was upstairs, trying to rest. But Ryland couldn't. He just sat by the window, watching headlights crawl past in the dark, his pistol disassembled on the table in front of him. Piece by piece. Over and over. Maddox had been arrested. Dax too. The core of Blue Harvest had been dismantled, exposed, devoured by the press, and eaten alive by public opinion. His name, Ryland Graves, was back in the world again. The Pentagon issued a statement. Congress called for a hearing. Veterans posted his photo on message boards with the caption, "He never stopped fighting." But none of it felt like victory. Not really. Naira joined him just before sunrise, dropping into the chair across from him with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. You look like a man who won a war and still doesn't know what to do with peace. He gave her a tired glance. Is that what this is? Feels like it. He nodded. Feels like something. I just don't know what. They sat in silence for a while. Then Naira leaned forward. What happens now? Ryland turned one of the pistol parts slowly in his fingers. I think I disappear again, but this time by choice. He stood, walked to the other room, and picked up the flash drive. The last copy. The full archive. He dropped it into the fireplace. Watched it burn. No drama. No hesitation. Just wait. Finally letting go. She didn't leave a note. Didn't say goodbye. When Ryland came downstairs the next morning, Laurel was gone. No confrontation. No apology. No plea for forgiveness. Just silence. And maybe that was better. She'd left the ring, though, the original one, the one she'd worn on their wedding day. Placed on the kitchen counter beside a folded piece of paper with a single sentence. I remember who I was with you. Nothing more. Ryland didn't pick it up. He didn't throw it away either. He just looked at it, like it belonged to another life. Because maybe it did. Across the country, Laurel checked into a motel in Montana. No real plan. No badge. No title. Just a woman with a past no one would believe. She watched her daughter through a hotel window as Mira walked to school, being raised now by her grandparents, far away from all of it. Laurel didn't speak to her. Didn't knock. Didn't want to poison what was left of that innocent world with the ashes of her own. She simply stood there, hands in her coat, watching from a distance, and feeling every ounce of what she'd helped break. Weeks passed. No headlines now. No new files. No explosions or raids. The world had moved on, as it always did, swallowing the biggest stories in silence once the cameras turned away. But for Ryland, the world had slowed. He didn't rebuild a life. He didn't want one. Instead, he moved from place to place, quiet, off-grid, like a man drifting through the cracks of a system he once swore to protect. Until one night, in a gas station parking lot on the edge of Utah, he saw something strange. A young vet, barely 25, sitting on the curb, shaking, holding a phone, staring at it like it was a weapon. Ryland watched him for a moment, then walked over. You okay? He asked. The kid didn't look up. You ever feel like the country you bled for never even knew your name? Ryland sat down beside him. Quiet. Thoughtful. Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. The kid finally glanced at him. Recognition flickered. Wait, you're that guy. From the leak. Graves. Ryland nodded once. No shame. No pride. The kid's voice dropped. They said you burned everything down. No, Ryland said. I just lit the spark. The fire belonged to the truth. They sat in silence after that. No speech. No grand moment. Just one soldier handing off the weight to another who wasn't ready to carry it yet, but might, one day. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that's all a spark ever needed to be. Naira's screen blinked to life at 2:27 a.m. She was holed up in a small apartment in Portland now, hacking less, sleeping more, trying to remember what normal felt like. Then the message came. Encrypted. Bounced through 5 dead channels. No ID. She leaned in. 3 words. That was all. You were right. No name. No sender. Just a timestamp and a feeling. She stared at the screen, heart weirdly full. Because she had been right. Right that the war had to be fought. Right that Rylan had to survive it. Right that some people needed to be held accountable, not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the minds of everyone they tried to bury. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and looked out the window. No fireworks. No thunderclap. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing someone else out there was still breathing and still watching. The waves rolled in slow, steady lines. No violence, no urgency, just rhythm. Rylan stood barefoot on the edge of a remote coastline in Oregon, the wind brushing through his sleeves, salt in the air. He'd walked 3 miles from the nearest road just to be alone with the sea. Not to think, not to reflect, just to be. It had been 6 months since Maddox was convicted, 5 since Dax's plea deal shattered in court, 3 since Laurel sent her final message. Thank you for saving me, and for not staying. He didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say. They had all paid their price. Some in reputation, some in time, some in silence. And Rylan? He had paid in pieces. Little ones. Over years. But here, on this forgotten shoreline, he wasn't Commander Graves. Wasn't the ghost. Wasn't the weapon. He was just Rylan. A man still breathing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal batch. Tarnished. Bent. His old seal insignia. He held it over the water. And for the first time in a long time, he let go. The wind took it. And the sea swallowed it without ceremony. He didn't smile. But something inside him finally exhaled. And maybe that's all peace really is. Not the absence of war. Just the first breath after. The END before you go. If this story hit you, if it pulled you in, made you feel something, made you stop and think, then don't just scroll past. Tap like to show support. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Bold, raw, human. And share it with someone who loves stories that don't hold back. One question for you. If you were Rylan, betrayed, erased, but still alive, would you have chosen revenge or disappeared forever? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll be watching. And maybe, so will he.